Welcome to the sixth and final episode in a legendary series about the creation of Normandy. In this installment, Richard the Fearless, we will talk about the man who can truly be called the first Duke of Normandy. Richard had an auspicious bloodline, being the grandson of Rollo the Viking and son of Count William Longsword. Yet his early years showed little promise. When he was only 10 years old, his father died at the hands of his enemies during a peace conference. Soon after, King Louis of West Francia made young Richard a prisoner. Count Hugh the Great of Paris and King Louis IV began fighting for control of his Norman realm, and on top of that, pagan Norsemen began fighting Christian Norsemen in a religious feud centered in Evresine. Richard's fortunes changed in the year 945 when some Norman lords captured King Louis and restored young Richard to his homeland. With powerful supporters, the teenaged Richard sought an alliance with King Harold of Denmark, who sent pagan Viking mercenaries to free Normandy from Frankish rule. Richard also allied with Count Hugh the Great of Paris. As part of the agreement, he promised to marry Hugh's daughter Emma, then only a girl, 14 years after the agreement. Frightened at the prospect of facing a hostile alliance to his north, King Louis convinced Emperor Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire to attack Richard and Hugh. Yet, when the Reich's armies approached the gates of Rouen, the combined forces of Richard and Hugh drove them off in 947. King Louis may have wished to avenge this defeat, but he died after falling from a horse, which put an end to his scheming. A brief period of peace ensued as 13-year-old Lothar became the next king of the West Franks. And in a sign of confidence in their new alliance, Hugh the Great appointed Richard the guardian of his 15-year-old son Hugh Capet in 955. In 962, Theobald I, Count of Blois, attempted a renewed invasion of Normandy, but Richard's knights forced him to retreat before he even crossed the Seine River. Once more, Count Richard turned to the still pagan Vikings of the far north, hiring them to invade Blois. In the bloody rampage that followed, Richard's Viking allies killed Theobald's son, also called Theobald, and burned down the city of Chartres itself. This feat is all the more striking when one considers that Rollo the Walker, founder of the Norman dynasty, tried and failed to do the same thing 50 years earlier. After the end of this war, something peculiar happened. A time of peace broke out. Count Richard, by now known as Richard the Fearless, used this time to transform Normandy. He made a particular effort to remove Normandy from the fearsome politicking and power struggles that plagued post-Carolingian West Francia. Rather, he turned his efforts towards consolidating what he and his forebears won. His daughters made valuable marriage alliances with neighboring counts and overseas monarchs. Richard's daughter Emma married first King Ethelred the Unready of England, and after his death in 1016 she married the Viking invader who drove him from the throne, Canute the Great. Through restoring church lands lost in the chaos that followed his father's death, Richard won over the Norman Church. And most significantly in the eyes of his countrymen, he won the title of Duke, which came from the Roman term dux bellorum, which elevated him almost to the status of a minor king. Constant wars changed the way that the so-called sane Vikings, as the Normans were called, waged war. Rollo's men moved along rivers by longboat and fought in walls of interlocking shields bristling with spears. In need of greater speed, warriors who could afford horses became valuable. Like their Carolingian counterparts further south, these mounted warriors wore chainmail tunics, pot-shaped helmets, and rode massive war horses into battle. Most fought with lances or spears, sometimes riding up to the enemy, breaking their lances upon them, and then retreating to their lines to pick up more. These new Norman knights grew so skilled with their horses that they could stop on a dime, ride in a zigzag pattern to avoid arrows, and have their horses kick with their forelegs to shatter shields. Norman knights knew their horses so well that they could sniff horse droppings to see where a horse came from. If it smelled of grass, that meant local horses. If it smelled of oats, that meant foreign horses. With warfare so frequent, it also meant that the rules of warfare changed. Ironically, the frequency of wars in Richard's early reign helped to make it more regulated. Rollo and William Longsword might have seen wars as slave raids, but Richard needed to keep his armies in the field for a longer period of time. That becomes much easier if warriors do not die in appalling numbers with each campaign. Thus, the focus shifted from rounding up and selling large numbers of young men and women to capturing enemy warriors. After all, their families could afford to pay ransoms. Even better, a captured Norman, rather than facing enslavement or slaughter, simply had to wait for his family to pay up. These ransoms came from estates which had now been in their families for a generation or more. It is not an exaggeration to say that feudalism planted firm roots in Normandy during the reign of Richard the Fearless. By the time he died in 966 and passed the throne to his son Richard II, or Richard the Good, Normandy was firmly established. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.